What has violence ever accomplished?
Get the jacked up number 5. Hailing from the U is Ray Jones.
What has it ever created?
Dean Antonio Pierce.
Violence breeds violence. And only a cleansing can remove this sickness from our souls.
Anything and everything and shit. Podcast. Justin and Aaron.
What's up, everybody?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Anything and Everything and Shit podcast, man. Yeah. Much appreciated once again. Thank you for tuning in and making our show your show.
That's right. What's up, everybody?
Yeah. What's up, my brother, man? How are you?
Good, man. Another day in the hood.
Hell yeah. You know, another good day when we're at the studio doing this for
man.
y'all.
Episode 30.
Damn, at 30 already?
No.
The Dirty 30.
Yep.
Actually, you know, and after, you know, watching that little cleansing do we need? Hell nah, man. Bring on the violence. That's why they're putting up and that's why they're saying they're actually really putting up these cameras. So that way the elites can watch everything go down. So
never know, man. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on where you got football. It's getting ready to start, man. It's so excited. You know, Broncos. The
Cardinals,
birds
man.
over there.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So we can't wait, man. We're just so excited for it. You know, that we got some stuff about how violent the football game is. You know, sometimes people get concussions, people get broken limbs, torn ligaments. I've had plenty of run-ins myself because I used to love playing football no matter what it took. We used to play football in the backyard like we had pads on, you know, so we can't wait for that. We also got some stuff about Alcatraz and how, like, you know, it's been escaped from. We all know that. But did the people that were actually escaping actually live? I don't know. But AI might have figured it out for us. Let's check this out.
Surrounded by freezing, turbulent waters and suffocating fog, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary was never just a prison. It was the ultimate symbol of the United States government's uncompromising power. It was a place designed not to rehabilitate, but to break men. For decades, it stood unchallenged, backed by a terrifying myth: no one escapes the rock. But on one silent night in June 1962, that illusion of absolute control was shattered forever. 3 men vanished into the dark, leaving behind nothing but dummy heads in their beds and a mystery that would consume the world for more than half a century. The official narrative was swift and absolute. The authorities, desperate to protect the prison's infallible reputation, declared that the men had succumbed to the frigid waters, swallowed entirely by the bay. For decades, the story was treated as a closed case, a tragic, foolish end for desperate criminals. But science is an unforgiving adversary to myth. Now, thanks to the unprecedented convergence of DNA analysis, advanced hydrodynamic modeling, and cutting-edge artificial intelligence, the narrative has fundamentally shifted. This isn't just a story about a prison breakout. It is the story of how 60 years later, modern science finally proved that the greatest prison break in American history was an absolute success. To understand the sheer magnitude of this escape, you must first understand the beast that was Alcatraz. Converted into a maximum security federal prison in 1934, it was the end of the line. If you broke the rules on the outside, you went to prison. If you broke the rules in prison, you were sent to Alcatraz. The facility was an unparalleled feat of psychological control. Prisoners were subjected to headcounts up to 13 times a day. Metal detectors, tear gas canisters, and armed guards in elevated gun galleries watched every movement. But the prison's ultimate weapon was its geography. The treacherous currents and the 50-degree Fahrenheit water made the bay an unbreachable final barrier. Over its history, 36 men were involved in 14 recorded escape attempts. Most were captured, some were shot dead, and a few vanished into the waves, presumed drowned. To attempt an escape was universally considered a death warrant. That invulnerability came under terminal stress with the arrival of Frank Lee Morris and two brothers, John and Clarence Anglin. These were not ordinary inmates relying on brute force. Morris possessed a brilliant calculating mind, while the Anglin brothers brought unmatched resourcefulness learned from a childhood of survival in rural Florida. Placed in adjacent cells, they formed a highly specialized team. Their plan exploited a microscopic weakness in the inescapable fortress, salt damage. Decades of relentless sea air had degraded the concrete behind the small air vents in their cells. Over the course of many months, the team chipped away at the crumbling walls using stolen metal spoons, discarded saw blades, and a homemade drill cobbled together from a stolen vacuum cleaner motor. To hide their agonizingly slow progress, they crafted fake vent grills out of painted cardboard. By day, the cells looked entirely normal. By night, they were active excavation zones. To cover the mechanical grinding of their drill, Morris utilized the daily music hour, playing his accordion loudly to mask the sound of concrete being pulverized. But breaking through the wall was only the first step. They needed hours to get off the island, which meant beating the guards' nightly visual headcounts. The solution was a masterclass in psychological deception. The men sculpted incredibly lifelike dummy heads using a mixture of soap, concrete dust, and toilet paper. They painted them with flesh tones and glued real human hair, swept up from the prison barbershop floor to the scalps. Placed on their pillows, with clothes bundled beneath the blankets, the illusion was flawless. Once the holes behind their sinks were large enough, the men squeezed into an unguarded utility corridor, climbing plumbing pipes to a cavernous, empty upper level. Here they established a secret workshop. Surviving the bay required flotation. Over months, they systematically stole more than 50 rubberized prison raincoats. Using smuggled thread, they stitched the coats together into a massive pontoon raft. To make the seams watertight, they pressed the rubber against the prison's exposed hot steam pipes, vulcanizing the material. On the night of June 11th, 1962, the plan was set into motion. They climbed to the roof, pried off a ventilation shaft cover, and slipped out into the freezing night. They made their way to the rocky shore, inflated their raincoat raft with a modified musical concertina, and vanished into the fog. The next morning, the guards discovered the dummy heads. The prison went into lockdown, and one of the largest manhunts in American history began. Tantalizing but inconclusive clues bobbed to the surface of the bay: a wooden paddle, a sealed waterproof parcel containing the Anglins' personal photos, and a deflated life jacket. But no bodies were ever found. A year later, in 1963, a human femur bone washed ashore on Point Reyes, north of San Francisco. For the FBI and prison authorities, this was the convenient closure they needed. Assuming the remains belonged to the drowned escapees, the official narrative was cemented. In 1979, the FBI officially closed the case, declaring the trio legally dead. The myth of Alcatraz was preserved. But as the decades passed, scientific capabilities evolved. Researchers and forensic experts began to look at the cold case not with speculation, but with data. The first major blow to the FBI's official story came from the realm of physics and oceanography. For years, experts claimed the chaotic currents of the bay would have inevitably swept the men out to the deadly open ocean. However, in 2014, a team of researchers from Delft University in the Netherlands decided to test this theory. They utilized highly advanced 3D hydrodynamic computer modeling to reconstruct the exact tidal conditions of San Francisco Bay on the night of June 11, 1962. By inputting historical tide data, water levels, and wind patterns, they ran dozens of digital simulations. The results were staggering. The researchers discovered an incredibly narrow window of opportunity. If the men had launched their raft exactly at midnight, the shifting currents would have acted as a perfect conveyor belt, pushing their raft safely toward the Marin Headlands, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge. If they left earlier or later, they would have perished. Given Morris's meticulous planning, it is highly probable they monitored the tides and timed their departure perfectly. The science proved that surviving the bay was not a miracle. It was simply a matter of precise timing. But what about the physical evidence? What about the bones that supposedly proved they died? In 2015, forensic scientists decided to revisit the femur bone discovered in 1963, which the FBI had long used as the unofficial proof of the escapees' demise. Using modern DNA extraction techniques that did not exist during the original investigation, scientists successfully pulled a genetic profile from the degraded bone. They then acquired a DNA sample from a living maternal relative of the Anglin brothers. The results were definitive and undeniable. There was absolutely no match. The bones found in the bay did not belong to John or Clarence Anglin, nor did they belong to Frank Morris. The only physical evidence grounding the government's drowning theory had just been scientifically dismantled. With the tidal models proving they could survive, and the DNA proving they didn't wash ashore dead, a legendary piece of family lore suddenly took on massive new importance. For decades, the Anglin family had claimed the brothers survived. They received unsigned Christmas cards for years, but their most compelling piece of evidence was a photograph provided by a family friend named Fred Brizzi. Brizzi claimed that in 1975, while traveling in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, he bumped into John and Clarence Anglin. He took a photograph of two men wearing sunglasses, standing by a road on a farm. For years, skeptics dismissed the photo as an unverified rumor, a trick of the light, or simply two men who happened to share a passing resemblance to the fugitives. Then came 2020. Enter Iden TV, an Ireland-based technology company specializing in advanced artificial intelligence and facial recognition systems. Iden TV's algorithms are powered by deep neural networks, the same highly classified technology utilized by state intelligence agencies to identify suspects in crowded areas. Researchers fed the 1975 Brazil photograph into the AI system, comparing the faces of the men in the picture directly to the 1960 Alcatraz mugshots of John and Clarence Anglin. The algorithm didn't just look at their general appearance. It analyzed immutable biometric data. It measured the exact spatial geometry of their faces, the distance between the pupils, the specific angles of their cheekbones, the shape of the jawlines, and the unique curvature of their ears. These are biological markers that do not change with age, weight gain, or even minor surgeries. The results sent shockwaves through the investigative community. The algorithm confirmed a 99.7% match for both men. In the scientific and biometric community, a 99.7% certainty is considered an absolute definitive match. According to the state-of-the-art artificial intelligence, the men standing on that farm in Brazil, 13 years after vanishing into the freezing fog of San Francisco Bay, were undeniably John and Clarence Anglin. The escape from Alcatraz is no longer a riddle wrapped in government speculation and folklore. It is a testament to human ingenuity validated by modern technology. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers didn't just break out of a prison, they broke a national myth. They exposed the profound vulnerabilities of an institution built on absolute control, utilizing extreme patience, stolen spoons, and human hair to outsmart the highest security the 1960s had to offer.
You know, I remember watching a movie. I think it had Clint Eastwood or something like that in there. I was pretty young when I saw it, but it was like something like the bird from Alcatraz or something like that.
It's just called The Escape from Alcatraz. But yeah, in Clint Eastwood. I know it had some other actors that are kind of well known, but I just
I remember hearing the story. You know, and it was always the rock that couldn't be escaped, you know, and like we knew that Al Capone and some big people, you know, had been put out there from the past. You know, it was crazy. And then you hear about them shutting it down and everything, but they always said that anybody that actually escaped was, you know, eaten by sharks or whatever. There's no way they could have made it. They would have been dragged out to the ocean. Yep. And this was kind of crazy how they kind of figured out exactly how they were breaking out, you know. It's
and the thing is like, I mean, how, you know, it had to take you forever just to dig that hole, and just, you know, once you broke out of that, then you got to figure out your next maneuver to get to it.
These guys got life, man. They
got you don't have to hole, I guess. For real. But yeah, I mean,
you know, and then taking the raincoats and then putting them on the steam pipes and melding them together, you know, that's like they put their heads together, and I mean, they really came up with the master plan. Obviously, seriously, that's crazy. You'd have to think that the facial recognition stuff that we have nowadays could actually go a long way with, you know, solving like old crimes and stuff like that.
Right.
Because a lot of these people, there's a ton of people that fake their death, especially people that caught, you know, crime and all this, whatever they're
trying
doing.
To disappear, man.
So you never know, man, but it was pretty crazy when I saw, you know, it was like AI solved it. Like, well, I thought we already knew how they broke out, which, you know, we know the gist of it, but now we kind of know a little more about it. But then how they solved it, meaning like they still lived, and those people and their family that got pictures, they were real. Like, and they used that picture for facial recognition and figured it out.
Right. I mean, you know, to me, it's like how cool that they're actually, you know, they did, you know, I always thought that they made it. I didn't think that they died. I know that they said, well, they found that bone and blah, you know, and, you know, obviously they couldn't attach it to anybody at that time. And, you know, now that they know that bone does not belong to any of them. And so it's...
Well, and that goes a long ways to showing you the weakness of our authorities. You know, they want to cover up stuff like that when they actually have been beat on something. They won't ever let anybody know that they've been beat.
I think, and that's what it was. Is it was a pride. It was a pride thing more than solving the case, because they're like, we don't know, they're gone, and
it's like,
they're
gone and they're not coming back. So really, are they a problem anymore?
Right.
We just need to cover up our tracks.
Yeah, and they're not going to cause anything to get caught. You hope. Right.
Depending on the type of person that broke out and got away. These people were obviously very, very intelligent.
Right.
And I've always thought that, convicts are pretty smart because of the things they can come up with.
Yeah, I mean, all you have...
When you're in a time of desperation, it's amazing how the wits come out of nowhere and help you decide, like, well, if I need to do this, how am I going to do it? And all of a sudden, you're a MacGyver.
Yeah, when all you have is time to
MacGyver.
think. Yeah, when all you have is time to think, man. Yep. It's something's going to come up and be like, oh, how can I use this pin, or how can I use this string, or oh, look, I found this nice little rock.
Right.
I mean, it's when you're in a pinch and you ain't got nothing but time, you're going to figure out something, man, obviously. And paper mache faces and just,
using hair off the barbershop floor.
Right, man. I mean, and it's, and they had everything there that they needed to make everything and get away. And like how you were saying, just to form the raincoats over the heat, brilliant. And the greatest ever prison.
It's pretty much the best. You got El Chapo that's got people just opening doors for him. That's not,
that's
not creative.
That's
man.
not, it's but that one, it's swim across the bay and, with sharks and it's freezing cold as that water.
It's better than crawling through a shit pipe like the guy on Shawshank Redemption.
Right. Oh my goodness. Hey, when you want to get out,
I'll take the sharks.
So
I'll fight sharks. Never mind.
Right. Well,
it's insane.
That's gross.
But hey, we got football coming up, and if you're excited about it, so are we.
Hell yeah.
And we also know about the violence aspect of the game. And, a lot of people are taking their kids out of football nowadays where they don't want them playing in like mini football, even like high school football, anything like that, because of concussions, other injuries that they can get. It is a real thing. Yeah. It's a real danger to the sport. But does that make it even more exciting?
What has violence ever accomplished?
Get the jacked up number 5. Hailing from the U is Ray Jones.
What has it ever created?
Dean Antonio Pierce.
Violence breeds violence. And only a cleansing can remove this sickness from our souls.
The relationship with the violent sport of football is complex and fascinating. This is a game that has gone from glorifying massive hits and denying the lasting effects of concussions to guardian caps and strict concussion protocols and overprotecting QBs. A game that draws flags when hits just look too hard, which, after digging into this episode, is ultimately a good thing. I think a few months ago I was watching that flag football tournament. There was some incredible athleticism on display, amazing catches, great throws, but I couldn't help but realize that it kind of sucked. In terms of football, at least, because fundamentally it wasn't football. It lacked a basic element of football, which is violence.
Violence. Sorry, Ma Parker. Violence begets violence.
And while I don't believe football fans watch the sport for violence alone, I believe we do watch it for the danger, the incredible athleticism under the threat of violence. So I wanted to go back and explore football's relationship with violence and danger and the way the game has changed over the last 120 years or so. From players dying on the field to jacked up on ESPN to the brutal reality of what players live with after playing the sport we love to watch. Long before concerns about concussion, CTE, or helmet technology, football faced a far more immediate threat, the possibility that the sport itself would be outlawed because too many of its players were dying. At the turn of the 20th century, football was less a game of speed and tactics and more a violent contest of brute force. Borrowing heavily from rugby, teams packed players tightly together and relied on mass momentum formations designed to overwhelm defenders through sheer physical power. In a lot of ways, it foreshadowed the trench warfare of World War I.
There was this belief that young men were no longer going to face conflict, and it was going to soften society. So they were like, we need to find some surrogate. It literally was supposed to simulate the experience of going to war for young men.
How much do you attribute, success on television to Cletus?
What?
Where opposing sides would fight and claw for mere yards of land. The most infamous of these early football tactics was the flying wedge, in which players locked arms and sprinted together as a human battering ram. Defenders met these formations head-on with little protective equipment beyond a thin leather cap or no head protection at all. Historians have called it the Philip Rivers era of football.
There's been many wives who have practiced this with their husbands.
The consequences were predictable. Football caused broken bones, crushed ribs, skull fractures, spinal injuries, and internal bleeding. Newspapers regularly published stories about catastrophic injuries, and each football season brought reports of players killed on high school and college fields. In an era before modern emergency medicine, many injuries that would be survivable today turned out to be fatal. It's estimated that 100 college-aged men died of turf toe in 1903. Okay, I made that last part up, but you might have believed me, right? We also know turf toe is Micah Parsons' favorite injury these days. Right, Micah? The football death crisis reached its peak during the 1905 season. I don't know why I laughed when I started to read that sentence. That's not funny. Contemporary accounts reported 18 deaths and well over 100 serious injuries nationwide, shocking a public that increasingly questioned whether the sport belonged in American schools.
How come he's so good at killing people?
That backlash eventually reached the White House.
White House. White House.
President Theodore Roosevelt believed football developed courage, discipline, character, and most importantly, future podcasters. This was just 7 years after he led a cavalry charge up San Juan Hill in the Spanish-American War, so we're talking about one of the most courageous and perhaps batshit insane figures in our nation's history.
I'm going up this hill, and I'm gonna defeat these Spanish forces.
Yet, he also understood that the game's survival depended on reform. And thank God he did. In October of 1905, Roosevelt invited representatives from Harvard, Yale, and Princeton to Washington and urged them to preserve the sport by eliminating its most dangerous elements. Although Teddy Roosevelt did not personally rewrite the rules, it sparked a rethinking of the entire game. He saved football.
You saved me.
You're worth saving, my dear.
Which is why I consider him the most important figure in human history, maybe galactic history. Rule makers legalized the forward pass, hoping to spread players across the field instead of concentrating them into massive collisions. Dangerous mass formations such as the flying wedge were outlawed. A neutral zone was established to reduce violent scrimmage line impacts, and teams were required to gain 10 yards rather than 5 for a first down, encouraging a more open style of play. These reforms also helped lead to the creation of the Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States, the organization that would later become the NCAA. Now, players still suffered broken bones, concussions, and serious injuries, and fatalities did not disappear overnight, but the sport shifted away from repeated mass collisions that routinely produced catastrophic injuries and towards a faster, more open game built on space, speed, and individual athleticism. However, The open field created opportunities for faster, more violent one-on-one collisions. Players still wore little more than canvas jerseys and minimal padding. Many players continued to play without any head protection at all, believing leather caps were uncomfortable, unnecessary, or even a sign of softness, proving that convincing men to cover their heads for protection, either one, has always been a challenge. The culture of the sport celebrated toughness above all else. Before we go forward, let's rewind again real quick, because in 1893, decades before helmets became common, Navy midshipman Joseph Mason Reeves was told by a physician that another blow to the head could leave him permanently disabled, or as contemporary accounts dramatically warned, drive him to instant insanity. Rather than retire from football, because why would he do that, Reeves commissioned an Annapolis shoemaker to construct a crude leather cap from moleskin and leather so he could continue playing in the Army-Navy game. One of football's earliest helmets was not invented because anyone understood concussions or long-term brain trauma. It was just an improvised attempt to prevent another catastrophic skull injury. While 18 deaths prompted Roosevelt's summit in 1905, there were actually 31 deaths in 1931, but there wasn't the same uproar. Football had begun its cultural rise, and people were simply less willing to change or abolish a game they had grown attached to.
You almost believe your own crap, don't you?
The late 1930s, helmet use had become common, but not universal, and their protective value was iffy at best. The NCAA made helmets mandatory for college football beginning in 1939. It was a landmark decision, but it also reflected a subtle shift in thinking. During the Roosevelt reforms, officials had primarily changed the rules to make football itself less violent. Now, attention was beginning to turn toward protecting individual players through equipment. It was the beginning of a new philosophy, one that assumed football's collisions were inevitable and that technology, rather than wholesale changes to the game, could reduce their consequences, which is a philosophy that, of course, still exists today. Plastic shells replaced leather in the 1940s. Suspension systems gave way to foam padding, and by the 1950s and early 60s, the face mask had become standard. These innovations dramatically reduced skull fractures, facial injuries, and other traumatic wounds that had once been accepted as part of the game. It appeared that science had finally caught up with football, thus ending a time where I imagine football players having to wear face masks due to horrific facial injuries like Richard Harrow from Boardwalk Empire. The timing could not have been better. Football itself was becoming faster than ever before. Players were bigger, stronger, and better conditioned than previous generations. The growth of television transformed the NFL from a regional sideshow into a national spectacle, and the league rewarded these huge collisions that looked spectacular on screen. Open field tackles replaced grinding scrums as the defining image of the sport, and I believe the sport became so popular because it pitted different kinds of people against each other. Frank Gifford, someone who was seen as a pretty boy from New York City, who appeared in ads, could get leveled by a tough guy Iron Man like Chuck Bednarik.
I said these exact words. This effing game is over.
And it was celebrated as one of sport's most iconic plays. The sport could be high-flying, a spectacle at times, but there was always the chance that one of its most entertaining stars could get buried by a guy like Concrete Charlie. A hit like this was the genesis of Jacked Up on ESPN 4 decades later.
Get to Jacked Up number 5, and Sean Taylor from the U is Ray Jones placing Antonio Pierce.
What fans admired, however, also reflected football's changing relationship with danger. The objective was no longer simply to bring a ball carrier to the ground. It was to deliver a collision powerful enough to separate him from the football and break his will by separating his body from his soul.
Jim Otto.
Concussion. 20-plus concussions.
36 surgeries, not one game missed in 15 seasons.
20 times he broke his nose.
Yeah.
Broken nose 20 times. Right? Broken ribs, broken jaw. Broken, what is this one? Broken all his, oh my God.
All his fingers.
Broke all his teeth.
You need a Jim Otto poster.
Oh my
in this
God.
facility.
I'm not the best there is, but I'll fight anybody that thinks they're better.
One thing I have noticed is players aren't defined as hard hitters the way they used to be. Hard hits still, of course, happen in the NFL, but as the game has changed, we're not talking about safeties as enforcers like we did with Steve Atwater, Jack Tatum, Ronnie Lott, John Lynch, and Brian Dawkins. Linebackers like Jack Lambert, Dick Butkus, Bill Romanowski, all the way to Ray Lewis feel like an extinct position group. Today's NFL demands that these players be able to cover, not just blow dudes up in the A-gap. Sacking the quarterback is also an art of finesse versus the way one of the hardest hitting players in league history, Lawrence Taylor, used to do it. Bobby Wagner kinda is the last link to that type of player. And not to discredit any current players' toughness or the hard-hitting nature of guys like Derwin James or Fred Warner, but if your top attribute in today's NFL is hard-hitting, it almost certainly means you suck at covering, right? Like just Google search a list of hardest-hitting players in NFL history and it will be hard to find any current player on that list. Maybe the closest guy being James Harrison, which is just a sign of how the game has evolved with rule changes and how it is focused on quick passes and become a pass-heavy league. The helmet had become not just protective equipment, but part of the weapon itself, and not the way Myles Garrett tried to use it as a weapon. Although the NFL did have to officially ban using your helmet as a weapon after Lyle Alzado of the steroid era ripped a dude's helmet off and then threw it at him. Medical understanding simply couldn't keep pace with these changes. Concussions were dismissed as having your bell rung.
Having your bell rung, seeing stars, seeing fireworks, ringing in the ears, things of that nature. Hundreds, maybe thousands of times I could say that happened to me.
And players frequently returned to games after experiencing dizziness, confusion, or temporary unconsciousness. Coaches and trainers viewed these symptoms as evidence of toughness rather than a neurological injury like we know today. Pretty sure the poem "For Whom the Bell Tolls" is about the brutal reality of head trauma in the NFL. It was prophetic, really.
Do not ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee.
The helmet's success at preventing visible injuries reinforced the mistaken belief that it was also protecting the brain. In reality, while hard-shell helmets were remarkably effective at preventing skull fractures, they could do little to stop the brain from moving inside of the skull during sudden acceleration and deceleration. Much like the Arizona Cardinals every year, the invisible head injuries simply went unnoticed. By the end of the 60s, the success of the NFL had created a new problem. The combination of larger athletes, faster speeds, and weaponization of the helmet had shifted football's greatest danger from the skull up here to the neck and spine. The result was a growing number of catastrophic cervical spine injuries, broken necks, paralysis, and in some cases, death. In 1976, Oklahoma wide receiver Tinker Owens was left temporarily paralyzed after lowering his head into a collision during practice. Owens eventually recovered, but his injury became part of a growing body of evidence showing that spearing, or leading with the top of your helmet when you hit someone, placed tremendous force directly down the cervical spine. Around the time, neurosurgeon Dr. Joseph S. Torg and other researchers began documenting the mechanics of these injuries, demonstrating that it was not simply violent contact that caused paralysis, but the position of a player's head at the moment of impact. When the neck was flexed and the crown of the helmet struck first, the spine absorbed the full force of the blow. The same year, Tinker Owens was temporarily paralyzed. Both the NCAA and the NFL adopted rules banning spearing and other forms of helmet-first contact. Officials were instructed to penalize players who were deliberately initiating contact with the crown of the helmet, while coaches increasingly taught what became known as heads-up football, tackling, keeping the head up, seeing the target, and then leading with your shoulder rather than the helmet itself. The league also banned the Deacon Jones head slap in 1977, which was exactly what you think it was. Just a dude with giant, powerful mitts slapping the shit out of another dude's head. The clothesline tackle was also banned in the late 70s. The 70s of the NFL, that was the last era of where players on the field could kind of just do whatever the hell they wanted to another player to tackle them. Some of the shit you see in those old NFL films videos almost makes you feel like you time traveled way back in time to like true Roman gladiator type combat. Catastrophic cervical spine injuries declined substantially over the following decades. Yet, football's success in addressing neck injuries once again obscured another danger. By the early 90s, it looked from the outside that the sport had never been safer. I like to think about guys who played in the 70s calling guys who played in the 90s soft, and now guys who played in the 90s call guys playing now soft. It's all part of that evolution, right? But if you look back to 90s football, objectively, it was still pretty brutal. And in the 90s, players kept leaving the game with problems that an X-ray could not explain. Retired players complained of persistent headaches, memory loss, depression, mood swings, and difficulty concentrating. Many struggled to maintain relationships or hold jobs. Others developed symptoms resembling Alzheimer's disease while still in middle age. In 2002, former Pittsburgh Steelers center Mike Webster died at the age of 50 after years of cognitive decline, homelessness, chronic pain, and severe mental illness. Webster had been one of the toughest players of his generation, an Iron Man who played through countless injuries during a Hall of Fame career. His decline puzzled physicians until forensic pathologist Dr. Bennett Omalu, aka the Fresh Prince of CTE, because he was played by Will Smith, who examined Webster's brain during an autopsy. Omalu discovered abnormal accumulations of tau. No, Micah Parsons. TAU, protein changes resembling those found in boxers who had spent much of their lives getting punched in the head. He concluded that Webster had developed chronic traumatic encephalopathy, otherwise known as CTE, a degenerative brain disease associated with repeated head trauma. Something I think most people are now familiar with, but it was his study and his findings that brought this to the forefront. And his publication of those findings in 2005 marked one of the most consequential moments in football's medical history. The NFL's Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee publicly challenged his conclusions and urged that the paper be withdrawn, but the scientific evidence became impossible to ignore. In 2011, former Bears defensive back Dave Durson died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the chest, leaving behind an explanation that he wanted his brain to be used for research. A year later, Hall of Famer Junior Seau did the same. Both were diagnosed with CTE. When the iconic Frank Gifford died in 2015 at the age of 84, his family chose to have his brain studied. The man who had been knocked out cold 55 years earlier became one of 345 NFL players to be diagnosed with CTE after death. It's a list that includes Aaron Hernandez, Javon Belcher, Chris Henry, Colt Brennan, John Mackey, Jake Scott, Demarius Thomas, and Marshawn Nealon, who passed away in 2025 after taking his own life. I know this episode just got really heavy, and I do apologize for shifting from hard hits and dick jokes to the brutal reality of CTE, but I think it's important to understand that the NFL is still very dangerous and that we should collectively myself included, do a better job at respecting the risk players put themselves in by playing the game for our entertainment. The NFL is safer than ever, but anyone playing the sport, especially if they start young, are at great risk of developing CTE and many of the other health issues that coincide with it, like ALS, which has been at the forefront of NFL headlines recently.
First, I want people to know that I'm still me. ALS has changed what my body can do, but it hasn't changed who I am.
The CTE findings in the early 2000s suddenly put increasing pressure on the league to acknowledge the risks associated with repetitive brain trauma. It's why the NFL currently suspends players like Azeez Al-Shaair if he hits Trevor Lawrence in the head, or Kareem Jackson, guys who had repeated issues with leading with their helmet. And as all this information about CTE came out, there were a wave of players like Chris Borland who retired early to avoid the risks altogether. Luke Kuechly was just inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He cut his career short for similar reasons. Youth participation in football began to decline in some parts of the country as parents questioned whether the sport's long-term dangers had been underestimated. President Barack Obama famously said he wouldn't let his son play pro football. He doesn't have a son, but you get the point. In 2013, the NFL began to pay out a settlement of $765 million to 18,000 former players. Players who suffer from other conditions like Parkinson's disease or ALS are also eligible for monetary awards. Someone like Chris Johnson, who recently announced his ALS diagnosis, is eligible to claim $5 million as part of that settlement. Professional football players are roughly 3.5 to 4 times more likely to develop ALS, and the risk increases the longer guys play. Something has changed in the last decade regarding concussions. They're certainly treated more seriously. There's an exhaustive protocol around them, and I think we wince at big hits, gasping rather than glorifying them. At the same time, we still accept head injuries as part of the game, and now that the effects are well documented, we ascribe a certain amount of agency to football players who began their career post-2013.
My last play as an NFL football player was a major concussion. And before then, concussions were not as serious an issue or thought to be as serious as they are now.
I think we've decided that they're aware of the risks and they've accepted them, while the NFL's concussion protocol and guardian caps have washed away their liability. Whether that's fair or true, that players understand the risks enough to make an informed decision now, I don't know. I don't really know. I wonder if in another decade we'll have become so removed from the concussion era of football that new players no longer even think about it longer than it takes to scribble their signature down on a waiver. Despite being forced into doing so, the NFL has done a better job at handling concussions and ensuring players are properly diagnosed and meeting protocols before they can return to playing, and that coaches stay out of the blue fucking tent. I think where the league fails players is offering health insurance past 5 years once a player retires. That feels like the next step in the evolution of player safety to me, post-career care. I think the league taking an initiative and making a better effort to provide care to players once their career is over would be a massive win for the NFL. I mean that both in the form of financial and that point of view, and from a practical human POV in terms of resources and information and care for these men who are at a higher risk of CTE, ALS, dementia, and so on, and not to mention just broken down bodies and the ability to manage long-term pain. I think that should be a target for the players in their next collective bargaining agreement. The game itself is thrilling. A perfect pass, a kick return touchdown, a running back juking a defender out of his socks, a sack on third down, and yes, a big, hard, legal hit are still exhilarating parts of the sport. We don't tune in just for big hits, but we do enjoy them. What I know now is that in real time, it is hard to tell the difference between a good legal hit and a bad hit. What this episode should tell you is even if the hit is within the confines of the rule book, we really can't diagnose the ramifications of it immediately. I think about this hit from the Hall of Fame game recently. I love that shit when it happened. Once I knew the receiver was okay, once he popped up, I loved that shit. But imagine if that hit, which was helmet to helmet, ended someone's career in a meaningless game on the weekend where the NFL honors the greatest players in the league's history. The NFL has seen guys like Darryl Stingley, Mike Utley suffer spinal cord injuries, leaving both men paralyzed. Kevin Everett was temporarily paralyzed in 2007 after suffering a brutal hit on a kickoff. In 2017, we all watched with heavy hearts as Steelers linebacker Ryan Shazier suffered a spinal cord injury on Monday Night Football. He regained some mobility, but his career was over. Most recently, we were reminded how dangerous the game is when Damar Hamlin's heart literally stopped beating on the field after a collision with T. Higgins. That was a routine tackle. I haven't even mentioned the amount of sideways body parts we've seen the last decade or so. Dak Prescott's ankle, Alex Smith's leg, the sequel to Joe Theismann that nobody fucking asked for, Nick Chubb, Tank Dell, Cam Scadaboo, and even Patrick Mahomes dislocating his knee in 2019 on a mundane quarterback sneak. Sure, Mahomes was back on the field 3 weeks later, but when or how collisions can impact a player's health is always unpredictable, and many times some of the worst injuries occur in unintentional circumstances, where players aren't doing anything crazy, they're just landing in awkward ways. Wide receivers aren't sitting ducks in the middle of the field the way they used to be, but they still find themselves taking shots in vulnerable positions that would break most of us into two pieces. I think sometimes we get distracted by the fact that quarterbacks are a little overprotected, which takes away from the facts that the rest of the game is still incredibly dangerous. Catastrophic injuries are rarer than ever. A drastic change to kickoffs has reduced full-speed concussions, and medical personnel now possess the authority to remove players from games regardless of competitive circumstances. Every generation has believed it had solved the sport's greatest safety problem, only to discover another beneath it. Today's game is almost certainly the safest version of football ever played, but it is not a safe sport. Don't fool yourself. Nor will it ever be. We will never be able to remove the risk of brain injuries from football, nor will we ever be able to remove violence from football, because at that point it ceases to be football. The most vocalized fear for so many football fans is that the sport will become flag football.
Tell me what I gotta do to make things right. You could die, Joey.
And after watching that tournament in LA, I get it. Football fans have been characterized over the years as bloodthirsty Neanderthals watching the game to see someone get depleted and wheeled off on a stretcher. But that's never been my experience, especially in the last 10 years. I think the vast majority of fans watch for the chess match between coaches, the amazing processing ability and arm talent from quarterbacks, and superhuman athleticism from everyone else on the field. However, the possibility of violence, not necessarily the occurrence of a catastrophic injury, but the ever-present possibility of serious physical consequence, a certain amount of legislated danger, is fundamental to what makes football compelling. And as long as we know, the players know the risk, we can all continue to enjoy it. There is a certain amount of violence that would have doomed the sport, and a lack of violence that would have also removed the excitement altogether.
Worth it.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I love football. I mean, like how you were saying at the beginning of the show, you know, we like at the apartments, man, rain, snow, man, we were
Snow
out.
was great, man.
Dude,
It
the
was like
snow
Fumble
games
Rumble.
were freaking awesome. And yeah, man, we were, we were extreme on each other, but we weren't kind. I mean, and we were out there, and it was fun, man. And you put pads and helmets on, you're going to get a little bit more extreme on it. And that's the downfall about it. It is an extreme sport.
People, I love it, man.
Yeah. I mean, I loved it,
I loved hitting people. I loved getting tackled.
Yeah.
I loved all of it. Going up, taking the ball away from somebody or going up and fighting for the ball or,
right.
It was great. Every bit of it. I couldn't wait until we could actually play in pads in 7th grade. I was like, oh my God, we can't wait. So like the whole summer before, I was out there in the yard running around, training,
getting ready and
footballs,
shit.
getting all ready, and then they made me a lineman.
Be like, whoa, hold on.
Yeah.
This ain't the position that I wanted.
Yeah. And then 8th grade, when they actually, we got a new coach, he's like, what position did you play last year? And I was like, first string tight end. And he's like, no, you didn't. He's like, but you can do it this year. It's yours to lose. You know what I mean? And I loved it. But that also led to a lot of days where I was running around the track after practice where I barely make it because my head felt like my brain was rattling in my head.
Yeah, man.
You know, because we hit hard. That was what we were taught.
Well, especially back in our day. I mean, that was what they taught. It's like, bam,
he got his bell rung. He'll be all right.
Yeah, here. Take a salt tablet. Here's one of those things, the little, smelling salts and all that good stuff. That that's how it was. And then the whole concussion thing came about, and the whole, was it the CMTs? Right, is what they were talking about.
CTE.
Our CTE. That's
well, even, before that, back in like 1990, I was really aspiring to be a football player, and that's all I wanted to do. And then we moved to Aurora from Brush, and in the 3rd week of high school, I got run over by a car, and it ran over my head, and I actually was trapped underneath the car, and I had a tire track like up the side of my face, like bruised into my head. But they flew me to the hospital, and the doctors were like, I mean, he's fine. He's got a fractured skull, but he's fine, And then after that, my whole life changed. It was like my attitude changed. I would have like anger bursts that I had no idea where they came from. Sneaking out, shoplifting, just all of a sudden getting into a hard time, and like I was an A++ student before this, and then all of a sudden I could barely pass 9th grade.
Yeah,
but the brain rattles, the headaches, all that stuff didn't, nobody even talked about it. It was nothing. It was 1990, so nobody cared.
Well, and that's the thing is like, everybody knows head injuries are bad, but they just, wasn't it.
They would just tell you not to let a person fall asleep.
Right.
If they do, check them every couple hours.
Keep them awake for 24 hours,
whatever, right. Man. None of that matters.
Well, no, and that's kind of
your brain's going to bleed whether you're awake or asleep.
Yeah, man. And it's crazy to think on all that, just how many people have gone through just the crazy traumatic brain injuries. I mean, it's like, you were talking about, when you're going to become playing football, and the year that I supposedly my mom was going to get me in a peewee, it was, I had my bike accident, and I had a extremely crazy head injuries from that. I know I've told you the story, but I'll go ahead and tell y'all too, because it's a pretty good one. So it was back when I was like 10, 11, somewhere around there. I think I was around 11. And neighbor kids, are out there summertime before school starting, and our neighbors, next to me and shit had 2 10 speeds. Well, one was a smaller one, was a bigger one and shit, and so we were like, hey, we'll race around the townhouse, circle and shit like that. We're like, yeah, we could get on. And so, I got the smaller bike, and freaking my friend, he got on the bigger one, and, dude, I whooped his ass, man. I'm quick, man. Well, I was quick. I'm not so quick anymore, but even on a bike back then, I was like, wah! And, so, we got back to the, their starting point, and he's like, what? I was like, I whipped your ass, blah, blah. He's like, well, let's do it again. He's like, you get the big bike this time. I was like, I don't give a shit. That's, how we roll, man. You want to go again? Well, let's go again.
Right.
So, freaking, so yeah, I get on the bigger bike and we start off, and I'm ahead of him and shit, and you know how the speed bumps, they got that little section right there, and we're both kind of racing towards that to get through so we don't have to slow down and go over the speed bump. And well, I'm a little bit ahead of him, and he hits, he kind of bumps my bike, and my bike starts shaking, and I freak out. I'm a kid, and hit both
Bump
brakes.
drafted you.
Yeah, man, and I freaked out, hit both brakes, the speed bump at the same time, and flipped over, and freaking bike, smacked me right in the head, and broke a piece of my skull against my, broke it free. It was pressed up against my brain, and bruised my brain and tore my brain lining, and I had to go have surgery and all that stuff. And they were saying there was people like that had similar that would they had passed, and lucky to be alive on that one.
Right.
So and I had just like you, other injuries and stuff like that, and I've always wondered how much that especially now that they've started looking more into the concussions and brain injuries and stuff like that. And,
me personally, I've been in a lot of fights, I've been in a lot of things with car accidents, all kinds of stuff where I hit my head. I got a big head. And when I say that, it's really hard to find a hat. I'm not kidding. Everybody's like, what do you mean? And then they put my hat on. They're like, holy shit, dude. Like, I got a big head, so I'm a little top heavy, I was like running around like this. It's like when I fall down, that's the first thing that's going to hit, man. It's like, so I've had a lot of head injuries in my time, and the thing is, like, those things happen. You learn what it sounds like when you, with your head,
like a freaking
right on
man.
your forehead or whatever it is, hitting a sink. Dude, that one was crazy. I was only in 4th grade, and this kid decided to spin me around in a bathroom and then let go, and I smacked my head on a sink, and then I didn't know what was going on. I was on Queer Street, walked into the class, and all the kids started screaming, and I kind of vaguely remember that part, but yeah, they had to rush me. And I was a little kid, you know what I mean? So it's like, but when you don't know what these things have actually done to you, all you know is how messed up your life or how wrong the things that are coming out of your thoughts or stuff like that are. That's the hardest part. That's where these football players and these athletes, when they ended up, deleting themselves, is basically because of the same thing where they were going insane. They don't want to hurt anybody, but their rage is so huge that they don't know where it comes from. The only thing that they know is silence, and that's what they want. And that's what it leads to until you find out. Like for me personally, I found out about it when I think it was Chad. It was a Bengals football player that fell out of the car or a pickup truck and smashed his head, and he ended up dying, and he had CTE, and that's when they started talking about it more, and that's when I found out about what the side effects of CTE are. You know what I mean? Yeah. Where it's like, this is what will show you that this is basically what you have. And it's like, I read the list, and it was like I had 9 out of 10, Totally. And so I probably definitely have it. But once I learned about that, I was able to identify it.
Right.
Whenever I was having a mental issue or an outburst where it was like, where the hell did that come from? It's like, bro, just take a breath. It's not normal. It's okay. It's gone. It's just like a bird flying over your head. You just don't let it build a nest.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and that's why, we've always, when we talk and stuff, we talk about stuff like that because we have similarities of just like, dude, I don't know what the frick happened today, but man, it's just like, it's just one of those things, bro. You just can't, sometimes you just, like how you're saying, step back, take a breath. Unfortunately, I'm just quick response on stuff, and I'm like, where the flip did that come from? And that's why I think a lot of this has come from a lot of my head injuries. And I was younger when I had a lot of my head injuries, and it's funny because my sister, she's coming up from my mom's birthday. Happy 80th birthday, Ma! But September 10th.
Birthday.
But yeah, so but she's coming in, like every time we talk, she always reminds me, hey, you remember when this happened and when that happened and blah blah, and the Superman one, or sliding into the carport and busting your head, and like, yeah, so. But I do think, my biggest one was when I did have that brain, brain surgery, and it, that's a big bruise on your brain isn't something good.
We survived it. Then we still played football. And we still did all this other stuff together. You know what I mean? Like, so we've made it through. We've survived. But there are a lot of people that don't. You know what I mean? And I want to just let everybody know out there that anybody that's feeling suicidal or like you're not enough or anything, or like you're completely confused about everything that's going on through your head, that's a typical thing from a head injury. And, just reach out to somebody. You've had a traumatic brain injury, and trauma is very deep. It's something that you can't consciously just be like, oh, it's gone.
And they say that TBIs don't, I'm sorry not to.
No, you're good.
But they say that TBIs do not go away.
Right.
Traumatic brain injuries are just there, and they're not going to, so like how Justin was saying, and it's shown that, the depression and the anger and just the swings that come from it. Like I say, I ain't trying to put my issues on anything, but there's just stuff that I don't understand about it.
Right.
And, and just thinking
sometimes you have to forgive yourself for the things you don't understand. And that's the hardest part, is when you have to forgive yourself. It's easy to forgive other people because you're told to, or because, that's the right thing to do. But at the same time, forgiving yourself for the things that we've done is a really hard thing to do. I know I say that from a personal standpoint, because I always said I would never. And though I have, I'm still like, things happen in my head, it's just the way it is. And just, I have to control it. That's what makes me a man. That's what makes me a survivor, is admitting it, seeing it for what it is, and just fighting it head on, you know, and just being like, it's not going to control my life. It's not going to make the decisions for me.
For real. This
is going to make my decisions.
Strange facts you may have never known.
December 16th, 1811, 2 a.m. in the morning, the earth beneath the Mississippi Valley began to shake so violently that the river stopped flowing reverse direction and ran backwards, while church bells in Boston rang from the tremors 1,000 miles away.
Should have had a bell in there. Dong. It's crazy.
That would have been cool. Dude.
The water went backwards.
Dude, to make the Mississippi, that's some powerful shit right there.
It's a wide river.
Right. And well, and that's, kind of crazy, especially because all these earthquakes have been happening recently, with Colombia and Venezuela and all that stuff. I mean, it's pretty insane, but and then you start thinking, like, damn, an earthquake made the Mississippi River flow backwards. That's how powerful that shit was. Could you imagine if there was buildings and shit like on that? Like, I mean, big buildings, like how, like in,
they probably had like houseboat type things, like the Queen, whatever those things are, those paddle boats.
Yeah. But I'm just
Proud
like,
Mary.
Could you imagine? But I'm just saying, how
roll on.
How's that? Oh, man, river,
where are you going? You're supposed
apparently
to go
backwards.
that way.
Right? Dude, maybe that's where it came from. He's like, whoa, hey. You're supposed to be going that way, man. Where are you going?
Here.
Dude,
that would,
still.
I mean, seriously, that would be one of those things where you're sitting there on your boat and you're just all chilling.
Yeah, man.
And you're like, wait a minute.
Could you imagine?
Why are we in Canada?
Right. Well, and imagine being like, never have gone through an earthquake before and just be like, what the flipping heck was that, man?
That would suck.
And you don't hear about like earthquakes happening.
That's what they said. It was under the ground,
right?
Like under below the river.
That's insane. I didn't even really think that there was fault lines there, but maybe it's just
core quake.
Insane, man.
Right.
Insane.
Maybe it was the Chinese. They did it.
You never know.
If you drill all the way down, you end up in China.
That's a big asshole.
Pun pun intended.
Yeah, man.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you for watching our show.